If you're looking for an in-depth tutorial on how to paint on glass, you've come to the right place. Let me take you on a journey with a step-by-step guide of how to paint on glass. Hello and welcome to my studio. If you're new to the channel, I make inspirational videos on all things stained glass, from designing through to painting through to making windows. And today I'm going to continue our series on painting on glass. My previous video showed you some of the essential kit that you're going to need if you want to start painting on glass. I'm going to be working with this paint here, which is a Reusch paint. It's an American paint and we use this a lot in our tutorials. I do teaching classes here at the studio. So let's start with how to mix our paints. Paint comes in this format, which is a powder format. It's quite a mixture of components. Just to let you know that it is toxic, and that if you're doing a lot of paint work which requires dust which is being created, you need to wear a mask. However, it is important to know that there are health warnings on these paints, and to be aware that you should wash your hands before eating food. Don't put your hands in your mouth, don't touch your face when you're working with paints. All of these key elements, become familiar with them, get to know them, because you just want to be safe when you're working with the materials. These are great materials to work with, but you need to treat them with respect. Okay, so we mix our paints and then we start applying a little bit of water, but trying to make sure that the pigment mixture isn't too watery. Think about it like a toothpaste. It's quite a thick, gloopy paste that you want to create. Generally speaking, I will spend about 6 or 7 minutes just working with this pigment like this. I will add a small amount of gum arabic. Gum arabic comes in different formats. It comes as a powder format, or it comes as this liquid format. But if you add too much, what can happen is in the firing process, the paint will actually fry or bubble, and you'll get little micro bubbles in the pigment. Generally speaking, I just use the end of a paintbrush like this, and I add a very small amount, just a drop. And then we add that into our paint mixture. And again, this is personal preference, and I would encourage you to experiment with the amount of gum arabic that you add. This is essentially a preparation video for early painting techniques. These are the essential things that you need to know in order to prepare your pigment for painting. Generally, what I do after that is I cover the pigment. This reduces the amount of water that's evaporating from the pigment and allows it to stay in its best format. Any little microscopic elements of dust or debris show up in the pigment, and it's really annoying because you're trying to get a nice smooth finish and there's a little speck of dust in there. So do your best. We can't eliminate dust altogether, but do your best to kind of protect the pigment in between using it, but just by covering it like this. Okay, let's move on to preparing our glass. So the glass I'm working with today is simply float glass. It's very important that we clean the glass thoroughly. I'm just using a commercially available glass cleaner, which is a vinegar-based glass cleaner, and give it a good clean. So the first brush we're going to work with today is a rigger brush. They come in different sizes as described in my previous video. This is a relatively medium-sized rigger brush. They are different sizes, different thicknesses. And again, experiment with the brushes until you're happy with the ones that you need to work with. So we've got our pigment here. To that, we can then add water. And then we are loading the brush by just doing little circular motions like this. So I would encourage you to just spend a little bit of time playing with the rigger brush. It is a slightly acquired taste. It's different to painting on paper. Glass is a lot more slippery. The rigger brush is slightly harder to control, and it will take you time to develop your own skills and your own way of working with the rigger brush. But this is a very useful piece of equipment for doing especially line work. So if you want to do a straight line, use your bridge as a resting point. It's not the same as painting lines or creating lines with a pen, where you can run a very thin line for a longer period of time. But a rigger brush will run out of juice relatively quickly. It's very forgiving painting on glass, especially line work, because you can tidy up the lines afterwards with a small pin or a needle or a stick. So the next brush that I want to introduce you to is the Hake brush or applicator brush. This is a thin brush which is used to create washes of pigment on the surface of the glass, and that is used in conjunction with our Badger brush. Our Badger brush is going to be one of your best friends. This is a great brush for creating lots of different effects, and it's the core brush that we use for manipulating thin washes of pigment and creating shading from light to dark. The Badger brush is the best brush to use. The reason we use Badger here is that it's very soft hair and it tends to not leave bristle marks in the surface of the glass with a little bit of practice. Let's start with our Hake brush. Using a little bit of water, we will create a thin wash of pigment from our lump of paint that we've got here. Once we've loaded the Hake brush with a little bit of pigment, we work quite quickly to apply the pigment to the surface of the glass, and then we use a Badger. We don't want the pigment to dry out too much because it becomes much harder to work with. Not too much. If you apply too much pigment, it becomes too dense and you can start to see the Badger hairs on it. Holding the Badger brush in a vertical way quite lightly, we just kiss the surface of the pigment in multiple directions like this, just to try and even it out. This does again take quite a lot of practice because it's very easy to apply too much pressure and leave score marks, and it's also very easy to just let it dry out. You have to sort of mentally prepare for this and physically prepare, get all your bits and pieces together, because you have to work at a certain speed. There's no way of doing this other than simply practicing. It's a method which is an old style way of creating a texture, but you just have to work at it really quite quickly over lots of layers to get the best effect. And that is a very good way of applying lots of layers of shading, starting with very pale, working up to darker shadows as your second or third firing. So there we have it. Thank you very much for staying to the end of this longer tutorial video today. I make these videos as inspirational pieces for the creative community at large. If you're interested in stained glass, you may be making stained glass windows or leaded glass windows. You may have an interest in fused glass, or you may be a creative working in a completely different field who's simply curious as to how glass painting actually works. Hopefully you find this video of help and of interest. If you want to leave any comments, please do so, and I'll make more videos like this if it's of interest to you. If you liked it, leave a like. If you didn't, leave a dislike, and I'll see you in the next one.